Welcome, this is Najma Minhas for Global Village Space. Pakistan's abysmal economic performance has been continuing for decades. However, the recent collapse in the rupee, in exports, and once again the increasing current account deficit has had many calling for a charter on the economy. It's a call that's been supported by some politicians, business leaders, and chambers of commerce. However, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also mentioned it in his August the 14th Independence speech. It is something that is being endorsed by the country's largest English newspaper, Dawn, who has asked that parties should sit down and come to some kind of consensus on economic rights and decisions such as how much they need to spend on health, education, defense, what their ideas are on inflation and unemployment. I'm joined today by Mr. Javed Hassan, chairman of the Economic Advisory Group, who vehemently opposes the idea. Javed, thank you so much for joining me today. Javed, we have some agreement on basic political rights such as democracy, and we have a consensus on that. What is wrong with having a consensus on economic rights?
I think democracy is basically actually allowing a lot of people having representation of their views. It allows a wide variety of views to be expressed. In economics also, we have to remember, it's a number of different alternatives. Economics is never a single alternative presented to the public. As they say, economists tend to be two-handed or many-handed. Truman famously said that I would love to have a one-handed economist because every economist he met would give him many different alternatives. It's about trade-offs. It's about allocating resources. So when people talk about economic charter and consensus, it would be interesting to know what are they talking about in reality. Because really the basis of economics is about taking resources from some individuals or some groups and probably distributing it to other groups. And that's a major function of the government. Now, and this all requires a certain degree of participation of the public. So when you say economic charter and consensus, it would be interesting to see what exactly do they mean. Look, I mean, there was consensus at some point in about 10, 15 years back that we needed a lot of power. And because of that, we had these IPP contracts. Lots of us, that's not again necessarily that everyone agrees, but lots of us think those were dreadful contracts and has cost the country hugely. Now, it would have been great if there was not this kind of consensus and there was enough debate and questioning. So I think if we're going to have democracy, we have to agree, should we want a democracy? Do we want manifestos?
No, but you're saying, is there going to be a basic consensus amongst the population on policies? So which person in the country doesn't want low inflation, low unemployment, doesn't want growth for the economy? Surely there's a consensus on this.
I have no doubt about the fact that everyone wants to have low inflation. But even in the fact about low inflation is a very interesting one because there's been long debates among economists around the world that how much is low inflation low enough. There are some people who will take about 3% being low enough, but that would mean if you have 3%, that would mean unemployment will tend to be high. There's a direct trade-off between low inflation and unemployment. Some people would say we want 1% inflation, and that possibly might mean higher interest rates and lower employment. So look, it's all about trade-offs, and frankly speaking, it's never easy, and that's why you have political parties which develop manifestos, and within that manifestos you have a set of policies, a set of alternatives, which hopefully parties are differentiated upon. One party says we will spend more on roads, the other says we'll spend more on health and education, and there are two trade-offs. The one thing we have to remember is that resources, especially in countries like Pakistan, are constrained. We don't have, infinite amount of resources. In fact, no economy has infinite amount of resources. And where those resources have to be allocated, you're going to have trade-offs. And even if you agree that you have to have low inflation, how much is low anyway? So really, I think the idea of consensus is a very interesting one. But it's when you start sort of breaking it apart, you realize even while there's consensus, you can have within that consensus a lot of differences.
Okay,
So
but I want to talk, for example, privatization. If we take that as a point, it's generally agreed that privatization is needed in Pakistan. We have a lot of state-owned enterprises which are extremely inefficient, loss-making, a burden on the taxpayer. Wouldn't it be good if all the parties actually agreed, yes, we need privatization? Because one of the issues is, for example, if we take PIA or we take the steel mills, there was a lot of contradiction from PMLN and PTI both saying, yes, we need to privatize these. But the PPP, for example, saying no, because these were big recruitment grounds for them. Or the MQM saying, no, we don't agree with this because these were big recruitment grounds for them. Wouldn't it be good to have a consensus on issues like that? That yes, we need to go ahead with privatization because we can't, as a country, take the burden of losses. And if we, for example, were able to convince the PPP on this, would this not be a step forward for the country?
Najma, you and I think privatization is a good thing. And we can present very good arguments why it's a good thing, and we can show how dreadful the losses are and how most of these public sector companies perform badly. However, I think it is within the right of PPP to say, no, we don't like the idea of privatization. And what I feel is the important people to decide are not a few intellectuals or academics or a few politicians who should sit around in a smoke-filled room and decide what's good for the public. It's for the public to decide whether there should be more privatization or there should be more nationalization. It's for the public to be given all these alternatives. I think we have to understand where this comes from. This kind of belief that a few people, and really it is about a few people, even if it's 200-300 people, top politicians, top businessmen, top academics come together, sit around, agree what it should decide what's good for the general public without involving them in the decision making. Now, I have to say there's some dark history in Pakistan where there's a feeling that a few people, whether it's we've had dictatorships, we've had technocratic sort of regimes, and that a few people can decide what's better for the vast majority. I think it is important for the vast majority to be very much involved in this decision making. Very often, again, there is an element of certain elitism, I dare say, amongst a lot of us, where we think that the public knows no better.
No, but the politicians are our representatives, right? So they always make decisions for them. So if they come to a consensus, they are basically coming to a consensus on what they believe that the majority of people in the country want.
Was that include that consensus should have been there in the manifestos? It should have been something that the public very much voted upon. If this Charter of Democracy is coming after they've been voted in, and it's something which that is not included in the manifestos, then it will be simply something which does not include the overall public's view. The best way to really resolve this is go to the public, have a general election. Those parties who believe in Charter of Democracy, Charter of Economics, if they get an overwhelming majority, the public in effect would have said, we want a charter of economy, and they can make that part of the manifesto. So I think there is a certain fear or unwillingness to actually seek the debate to be permeating in the public, and that's what is so scary about this. I think there are very strong cases for consensus, and you and I can both make them. I think we'll run large fiscal deficits. There's large amounts of subsidies. You and I both would agree that there should be removal of subsidies. But I have to insist, while I may strongly believe in that, while we are almost compelled to do so by IMF, I think it's for the public to really decide.
No, but if the politicians go to the public with not just saying we need a charter of economy, because in fact everyone's talking about it, but we don't know what they're actually talking about. What is the breakdown that they're actually looking at? If they provide that breakdown, that we believe that inflation should be 5%, we believe unemployment should be 4%, we believe interest rates should not go above 10%. And if there is that agreement, we believe there should be no subsidies and so on, right? If they gave precise numbers against policies, would that not be a good thing that everyone could have come on board?
Let's look at it in a different way. Magna Carta is something which increased it was a charter of a sort, and it increased the power of people. It was built upon. It led eventually the Constitution of America. These are great things. It was a development. The great thing about charters, they should be sort of timeless. They should have a sort of permanence about them. They should not change daily. Now, if you agree that inflation should be no more than 3% and interest rates no more than 5%,
right,
then that might be great for today.
Right.
However, economic cycles change. In the period of recession or depression, you might actually want to have fiscal stimulus, and you might actually want to see inflation and the fiscal deficit go
Right.
up. So you're talking about a particular cycle, a particular moment we find ourselves in the country where we obviously want very austere or stringent conditions. We might have a time where we don't want this. A great example is Japan. Japan, despite the fact that other countries facing inflationary pressures have been increasing interest rates, Japan has not been increasing interest rates because of that. Yen has been depreciating. So look, the point is, economic decisions are intricately and inextricably tied to politics.
Okay.
They are interwoven. So our political choices very often define our economic choices. And it's very important. Look, it's very important to actually have those differences, because if we don't have those differences, then what will we be arguing about? About personalities and just ethnicities, or who is more corrupt and who is better looking? Is that the nature of politics we want in the country?
So for you right now, what are the key issues that the government should be looking at?
Obviously, I think that any government, anywhere in the governments, the greatest motivation should be, or its main policy driver should be, how to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That's utilitarian belief that every government, one believes, should have, unless you have a sort of aristocracy which should believe that only the aristocrats should do well. But if we believe in sort of genuine democracies, we must believe that what issues are facing the people most, we should address those. And right now in Pakistan, the greatest issue really is inflation and unemployment, which is beginning to grow. Those are two key issues, as well as how do we bring about in the long term sustainable growth. Now, the route to achieve any of these will require trade-offs. Sometimes you might actually have to give up on growth to have lower inflation, as might be the case for the next few years.
Right.
When the PTI government first came in, it tried to have growth, but very soon found that it has to take tough measures under the umbrella of IMF, and then had to increase interest rates, had to do some very tough measures. It was criticized by the present incumbents about increasing interest rates, about imposing hardships, because it had to do so. But they were very critical of those measures at that time. I think it is important that, and very often those criticisms seemed unfair. But I think it's important to have those criticisms. That's what politics is all about. That's what democracy is about. Because even while what PTI might have been doing might be correct, it should have been under pressure to see how it can alleviate the conditions for the people. Similarly, now that we have inflation, month-on-month figures going as high as 36, 37%, the annual figure is well over 20%. I think it's important, even though it's under the sort of enforcement of IMF conditions, I think it's important that the government is put under pressure as to what it can do to bring it down. And one of the things it needs to do is to control spending. What we found out yesterday that the third quarter or fourth quarter figures, there was something like 4 trillion of increase in debt, in overall debt of the government. Just in 1 month, it was 3.1 trillion.
Right.
And it's not explained exactly how did this increase happen. So I think,
how do you explain the exchange rate that's come down so much? I mean, we reached a high of around 240, and it seems to have come down to around 214 currently.
look, there's
Pakistan.
a considerable amount of speculation on that. For a start, the speculation might be the right word to use, because there was a lot of hints that the rise from sort of 200 to 240 was on the back of a lot of speculation. But let's put it. Look, we run continuously a current account deficit. We are low on reserves. We should not be using reserves to support the currency.
Right.
So long as we continue to have current account deficits, our currency will continue to be under pressure. So right now, from what I understand, and it may be maybe not the complete reason, but from what I understand, the main reason seems to be two things. One is that there has been a real demand contraction. Economy has slowed down severely. We are seeing that lower consumption of oil. We are seeing lower production of autos, cement, just about. So there's lower consumption and basically a slowdown in the economy.
Right.
The other thing we are seeing is that, and this is spoken of widely, but it's not been confirmed by the government, but the state bank is making it difficult to import. LCs are not being issued by banks, so effectively, dollar is being rationed. So that's one way where you don't.
When the LCs open and we start getting imports again, that the currency will go down again.
I would imagine so. So long as we continue to have a current account deficit and to the magnitude of sort of $1 billion, and we don't, and we want to also build reserves, because our reserves are very low level now, and at some point we will start having to return the deposits which many countries have made. They've been very kind to roll many of these deposits, but it's increasingly, one thing we have to realize, it's increasingly difficult now to get loans or deposits for even friendly countries. This time around, UAE wasn't willing to just come and put in $1 billion of deposit on whatever terms. It asked for assets. It asked us to sell. I understand Qatar is doing the same thing. So
do you agree with that government policy that we're hearing, that the government may sell up to 51% to Qatar of PIA?
See, Najma, this is exactly the point why Charter of Democracy economy is so dangerous. People would have said we should do anything under the sun to meet IMF conditionalities under the Charter economy, because this is what is needed. Now, what is so sad about it, there has not been enough debate about selling these assets. I personally may very much support these sale of assets. I think government should not be in businesses. But is Qatar the best buyer? If we wanted to sell PIA, would there not be better buyers? Would Qatar be adding value? More or 51% means management control. Qatar has its own airlines. How will that conflict of interest work out? So we should really have had much more debate about this issue. So the public, again, has been completely cut out, and that's very dangerous.
Okay, finally, your thoughts on the RDA. We're seeing an outflow for the first time from the NERA Pakistan certificate. Do you think that's because of economic reasons or political reasons? I mean, do people abroad feel that the risk return is no longer worth it in Pakistan, or is there a political reason behind the outflow?
It's difficult to say, but I think most depositors are rational individuals. They would have seen a lot of question marks about Pakistan's default risk. I would imagine many of these deposits were over 1 year old now. They were coming for renewal. So what might be happening, because the accounting of this deposit is basically on a base of renewal. So what is renewed is also treated as new deposits. So a lot of these may not be renewed. As these are not renewed, we might see an outflow. So I think it's a question both of the political risk. Also, we do know that overseas Pakistanis tend to be PTI supporters. There's a sort of a lot of anecdotal evidence that the PTI supporters are less willing to be supportive of the current regime. So it's a mixture of things, like in all things.
Javed, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.